Well, after a disappointing home loss to Kentucky, Auburn fired head coach Hugh Freeze over the weekend, buying out the remaining $15.8 million on his contract and raising the total buyouts in college football this season to nearly $186 million, which was already a record. So let's bring in front office sports reporter David Rumsey. So, David, why did Auburn decide to make a move here?
Yeah, hey Baker, great to be with you again. It's kind of our weekly tradition now,
Yes, it
the
is.
college football coaching carousel. I mean, it's crazy. It's so expensive. And, this move, Hugh Freeze getting let go at Auburn, was really not all that surprising. He had a terrible record within SEC play, just 6 wins over the past 2.5 seasons. And if you know anything about how competitive the SEC is, that's just not going to cut it, right? Auburn is a former national championship winning program back when they had Cam Newton. So they have the potential, right? Especially with Alabama there, right in their state, winning so many national championships and still staying competitive after Nick Saban had left. So for Hugh Freeze to get let go, not that surprising. And his buyout, just over $15 million, pretty much nothing compared to what we're seeing at LSU with Brian Kelly or Penn State and James Franklin.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I mean, if anything, that $15 million is almost a bargain for the
Exactly.
SEC. But as I mentioned, 186 million dollars we've tabulated so far just in coaching buyouts, a huge record here. Obviously, that number is going to get to $200 million. Who now is sort of on the hot seat that we're sort of watching here?
Yeah, and that's just crazy if we take a step back for a second, because if you had said ahead of this season, could we get a record number? Maybe. Could we get to $200 million in head coaching buyouts? That's just wild. And like you said, it's easily going to surpass it at this point. We have several more names on the hot seat that I think a lot of people expect to be fired with those big numbers by the end of the year. We keep talking about Mike Norvell at Florida State, buyout in the neighborhood of $50 million by the end of the year. You look at Wisconsin and Luke Fickell. Do they move on from him? More than $20 million in buyout money. Not to mention, just plenty of other teams that decide, hey, we didn't make the playoff, or we didn't like where we ended. We didn't make a bowl game, and we're going to move on. So yeah, I'm $250 million. We'll see who gets let go.
David, are you surprised that 25% of the SEC jobs are now open right now? And I feel like the only name that gets thrown around the most to replace these jobs is somebody already in the SEC, and that's Lane Kiffin. Are you surprised by both of those things, that Lane Kiffin's the hottest coaching candidate right now, and there's so many SEC jobs open?
Yes and no, right? Because you look at, like we were saying, how competitive the SEC is. So if you're not winning, if you have a sub 500 record in conference play, that's just simply not going to cut it. So it's a cutthroat league. It doesn't happen every year. It's not like we're seeing this turnover. Now, maybe we will see this rate of turnover every year moving forward, now that we're in the era of revenue sharing and NIL. And if we're paying so much money to the players, then we got to hold these coaches a little bit more accountable. And hey, maybe they'll start structuring those contracts in a little different way, like the Louisiana governor was suggesting. He doesn't want to pay those huge buyouts or give all that money if the coaches aren't going to perform. So, no, I'm not surprised that 25% of the coaches in the SEC have been fired this season. And as it regards to Lane Kiffin just being, such a popular name for whether it's the LSU job or the Florida job, he certainly is the hot candidate right now. But I think if you listen to, college football insiders who really know the ins and outs of these programs and recruiting and boosters, it's not really a slam dunk, because when you're at a program like LSU, a program like Florida, the expectations are so high. And we know that there's so many outsiders that have influence on the athletics, whether it's boosters or just other influential figures, alumni, things like that. So it is interesting. Will Lane want to leave and go to maybe a somewhat, it's not a guarantee, it could be a dysfunctional situation. Maybe he just gets a big raise at Ole Miss, becomes maybe the highest paid coach in college football, at least for now, and stays put where he is.
Yeah, besides Lane Kiffin, are there other coaches maybe that are top candidates for a lot of these open positions? I believe Tulane's coach is one name that we keep hearing about a lot as well.
Right, yeah, and to your point about SEC coaches just continue maybe just hopping around the SEC, at Vanderbilt, Clark Lee has
Oh,
really
yeah.
turned that program around. And obviously they lost on Saturday, and kind of their CFP hopes took a little bit of a dash, although they still only have 2 losses. He's certainly going to be a name to watch as well. And maybe we'll see, if he doesn't leave, we'll probably just see this trend continue of coaches, you either leave and get a new job, or you get a contract extension and a raise at your current school, like we saw SMU lock up Nate Lashley. We saw Nebraska give an extension to Matt Rule, all just within the last week, right? So that's kind of the game, the carousel that goes around. You either get hired somewhere else or you get a better deal where you are.
Yeah, and interesting. Matt Rule got his new contract, and then Nebraska then lost over the weekend
Right.
to USC as well. Let's talk about the college football playoff because this week we're finally going to get the top rankings for the playoff. Any names, obviously, that or teams that you're keeping an eye on, and who potentially could surprise us in these rankings?
Yeah, so it's always fun. Now we have this annual tradition of the CFP rankings coming out first week of November or so. We've had the AP top 25 poll ever since the preseason, even though we know now that preseason poll with Texas #1 and Penn State #2 was drastically wrong. It's always exciting to see what does the CFP committee think of the teams and how does that relate to, this AP top 25 poll that we've been using all season. And I think it's really key because these first set of rankings really do set the standard for this next month until we finish out the regular season and we select those 12 teams for the playoff. And we saw last year, it was in the first year of the 12-team playoff, it was kind of hard for a team to leapfrog another team, once they were ranked behind them without that other team losing a game or them winning a huge game. So I think it's going to be really key to see how the committee decides between these 1 and 2 loss teams, particularly, maybe a multi-loss team from the SEC versus a single loss team from the ACC. How do those stack up? That was a huge debate last year, right? Does losing 2 games in the SEC equate to losing 1 game in the ACC, or is it simply just a numbers game? It's not as simple as it is in the NFL, right? Where you just tiebreakers win the day. So, and of course, we have financial implications for this, right? If you're seeded 1 through 4, you get automatically sent to the second round, the quarterfinals. If you're seeded 5 through 8, you get a home game and kind of bring in some more revenue that way. So it's not just fan debate of where should teams be seated. There's some big bucks at play here too.
Absolutely. And by the way, obviously the top 2 teams are going to be from the Big Ten, but how many teams do you think from the SEC are going to be making this?
Yeah, I mean, as much turmoil as there is in the SEC with 25%, four of the 16 coaches getting fired already, like half the conference basically has been ranked in recent weeks. So I expect that to continue. And I do think that the SEC is really in a strong position when we finally get to December and we do have our second 12-team playoff bracket. I do expect probably 4 SEC teams this year. Remember last year we had 4 Big Ten teams and just 3 SEC teams, with Alabama controversially getting left out by some accounts for SMU after they lost to Clemson in the ACC title game. But this year, as strong as Indiana and Ohio State are for the Big Ten, it does look like the Big Ten will only have 3, maybe even only 2 bids, while the SEC should have 4, I would think.
Let's, in the last 90 seconds we got with you, David, let's talk about North Carolina, because it seemed like Bill Belichick got one of his biggest wins of the year for North Carolina against a pretty not very good Syracuse team, but he got it on the road. But is the tide sort of changing and turning here in North Carolina now that they've won, 3 or 4 games now this year?
Right. So this is their first ACC win of the season, which is key. And yes, obviously, beating Syracuse is nothing necessarily to write home about, but it is a victory. And if the previous 2 games, UNC was in those games. They were close games, close losses to Virginia and Cal. So listen, it's the ACC, right? It's not the biggest deal in the world, but North Carolina is now 3-5. If they could somehow rattle off a 3-1 record from this point moving forward, that would get them 6 wins. They would be bowl eligible. And I think given everything that they have had to endure in Chapel Hill this year, that would be a success at the end of the season. Moving into next year when, we've been writing about what is Bill Belichick's buyout? How could they get him out of Chapel Hill? Forget about an NFL team trying to hire him now. But yeah, I do think that one win in such a short college football season can build a lot of momentum. They're going to be double-digit favorites against Stanford this week, which, again, not the highest competition this year at least, but we'll see what they can do if they can get on a little run.
And then all of a sudden the talk of Belichick getting out of UNC is over then, I guess.
Yeah, I think they don't want to, at UNC, they don't want to move on from him after 1 year and start this cycle again. They want the Belichick experiment to succeed, obviously. So, like I said, if they can get bowl eligible, if they could finish 500 on the season, see if they could get a bowl win. Still a tough task at this point, not guaranteed by any means. Just build some momentum going into the recruiting season and trying to build that roster for 2026 and beyond.
Good stuff, David Rumsey, as always. Thank you, David.